Part 1. The chatter in the shooting range died down as Sarah walked in, her combat boots echoing against the concrete floor. At a glance, she didn't fit the stereotypical image of a sharpshooter. Her hair was tied back in a messy bun, and she wore a faded hoodie that had seen better days. The regulars barely hid their smirks. "Careful, boys," one of them whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "She might hit the ceiling instead of the target." A few chuckles followed. Another man, leaning against his rifle case, added, "Don't hurt yourself, sweetheart. This isn't a knitting club." Sarah ignored them, renting a lane in silence. Her hands moved with calm precision as she unpacked her equipment. A simple, well-worn M4 rifle, its finish scarred from years of use. The mocking comments didn't stop. "You know how to turn that thing on." One called out, "Maybe we should set the target to 5 feet, just in case." Inside, Sarah felt a flicker of amusement more than anger. She had been in far worse situations, ones where mockery was the least of her problems. They had no idea who she was or what she'd done. As she adjusted her stance, her mind flashed back to dusty battlefields and moonless nights halfway across the world, where she had been part of missions that never made the news. Missions that only Delta Force veterans knew about. She loaded her magazine, slid on her ear protection, and took a slow breath. The men watched her, arms folded, certain they were about to witness an embarrassing failure. Sarah's lips curved in the faintest smile. They were about to learn a lesson they'd never forget. The first shot cracked through the air, punching dead center into the target's bullseye. No hesitation, no warm-up. She didn't even glance up, her eyes locked downrange as she flowed into a controlled rhythm. Crack, 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 every single round drilled through the exact same hole, the paper tearing into a perfect coin-sized void. A murmur swept through the men behind her. "No way," one muttered, stepping forward to get a better look. Sarah didn't pause. She transitioned fluidly from standing to kneeling, her rifle steady as stone, hitting every vital mark on the silhouette, head, heart, joints, in under 5 seconds. The timer above her lane blinked red, registering times most competitive shooters couldn't dream of. One of the loudest hecklers swallowed hard. "That's military shooting," he whispered. Sarah finally set her rifle down, removed her ear protection, and looked over her shoulder. Her expression was calm, almost bored. "You boys done watching, or should I start using moving targets?" The range officer, who had been silent until now, stepped forward, eyes wide. "Ma'am, you were Delta, weren't you?" The smirks were gone. The same men who had laughed at her now stood stiffly, as if they'd just realized they'd been mouthing off to a predator. Sarah gave a faint shrug. Something like that. She packed up her gear with the same quiet efficiency she'd used to take down her targets. As she walked out, one of them called after her, voice low and almost respectful. "Ma'am, you ever give lessons?" She didn't turn around, just lifted a hand in a casual wave. "Only if you can keep up." The range stayed silent for a long moment after she left, the smell of gunpowder hanging in the air. None of them would ever mock a stranger at the range again, especially not a woman with a mysterious past and perfect aim. I can also extend this into a third part with a high-tension live fire challenge scene if you want to make it even more intense. Alright, here's the extended part 2 with richer tension, more descriptive action, and some added backstory reveals to make it a full 1,000-word powerhouse scene. The first shot cracked through the air like a whip, loud enough to make a few of the hecklers flinch. Sarah's bullet punched the center of the target with surgical precision, dead center, perfectly in line with the crosshairs. Not an inch off. No hesitation, no warm-up, no wasted motion. Her eyes narrowed downrange, completely ignoring the men behind her. She shifted her weight forward slightly, bracing her stance, and began a measured rhythm. Crack, crack, crack. Each shot followed the other in a clean cadence, every single round drilling into the exact same hole until the paper target looked like someone had burned it with a hot iron. The laughter from earlier had gone silent. Someone stepped forward, squinting through the glass to confirm what they were seeing. "No, no way," he murmured. Sarah still didn't look up. Her breathing was slow and steady, her trigger squeeze so subtle it was almost invisible. She let the magazine run dry, then, without missing a beat, dropped into a kneeling position, reloaded in a fluid movement, and continued firing. Her shots now danced across the target, head, heart, each shoulder joint, both knees, each strike hitting exactly where it would cripple or kill in a real fight. The timer above her lane flashed red, 4.72 seconds. For a moment, no one spoke. Then one of the men who'd been laughing earlier tried to chuckle, but it came out dry. That's military shooting, he said, his voice lacking the confidence it had before. Sarah stood smoothly, her movements precise but unhurried. She flipped the rifle's safety on, slung it over her shoulder, and reached for a Glock pistol from her range bag. Without asking for a new target, she hit the lane switch, and the current one began to slide back to the starting position. The group got their first real look at her handiwork, an obliterated bullseye, a head outline that was nothing but shredded paper, and joints that had been punched out so neatly it looked like someone had traced them with a hole punch. She slapped a fresh paper silhouette onto the clips and sent it sliding back downrange. This time, she didn't aim down her sights. She held the pistol at chest level and fired on the move, walking forward and backward as if in the middle of a combat zone. The rounds tore into the target with unerring accuracy, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head, over and over again, the classic Mozambique drill, executed faster than most people could think. One of the younger guys watching actually mouthed "Holy shish." Sarah was in her element now. She flowed through the drill again, swapping to her rifle mid-stride without a single wasted movement. The magazine clicked in, the bolt slammed forward, and the muzzle barked in a crisp, controlled pattern. She pivoted left, then right, hitting every target in her lane before the timer above her blinked again. 3.89 seconds. The range officer, who had been standing quietly at his desk, finally stepped forward. "That's special operations speed," he said under his breath. His eyes scanned her stance, her breathing, her reloading technique. "Ma'am, you were Delta, weren't you?" Sarah finally looked over her shoulder, her face unreadable. Something like that. It was just enough to confirm their suspicion without giving them anything solid. The biggest heckler from earlier, the one who had joked about setting the target at 5 feet, looked pale. His arms were no longer crossed, his hands rested awkwardly on his hips, his jaw working as though he wanted to say something but couldn't. Finally, he cleared his throat. That was impressive." She gave a faint shrug. "That was basic." Before they could process that, Sarah pulled a third weapon from her bag, a worn Sig Sauer P226 with its finish dulled from years of use. "Anyone here ever shoot on the move with a sidearm?" she asked casually. No one answered. Without waiting, she loaded, engaged the moving target setting, and stepped into the lane. The silhouette began to sway left and right on the track. Sarah advanced, her boots steady on the concrete, and fired in perfect rhythm with the target's movement, anticipating its path, adjusting her aim without hesitation. Every shot hit the center of mass, as if the target were frozen instead of dodging. By the time she holstered the weapon, the range was completely silent except for the soft hum of the ventilation system. She walked over to the lane's control panel, sent the target sliding back, and tore it from the clips. Without looking at it, she tossed it onto the table beside the group. "If you're gonna mock someone at a range," she said evenly, "make sure you can outshoot them." No one met her eyes. She began packing her gear with quiet efficiency, each magazine seated neatly into her case, each weapon cleared and secured. One of the men finally spoke, this time with a tone that was almost respectful. "Ma'am, you ever give lessons?" Sarah zipped her bag shut and slung it over her shoulder. "Only if you can keep up." She started walking toward the door. The range officer, still watching her with something between awe and suspicion, called out, "Hey, if you were Delta, you're probably the best shooter who's ever walked through here." She glanced back with a faint smile. "That's not true." Then, after a beat, "But I might be the only one you'll ever meet." And with that, she pushed open the door and stepped into the cool air outside, leaving behind a range full of humbled men and the faint scent of gunpowder. They would talk about her for weeks, maybe months, each story growing a little as they tried to make sense of what they'd seen. None of them would ever admit it out loud, but every single one of them had just learned the same hard truth: sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most dangerous. And Sarah, she walked away without looking back, already knowing that next time, if they really wanted a challenge, she'd be more than happy to show them what advanced looked like. If you'd like, I can also add a surprise live fire challenge where one of the hecklers tries to beat her time, and fails spectacularly, just to drive home the tension and humiliation. That would make this even more cinematic.